Hello and welcome back to A Better World. This is your host, Mitchell J. Rabin, and we're very glad that you're joining us today. Today we are also going to be recording for Radio for Peace International, an event taking place at the Roosevelt Hotel in Manhattan, in New York City, on nothing other than St. Patrick's Day. You can hear bagpipes in the background.
That's right.
And appropriately so, we are seated right now with Glenn Martin, who has been working with the World Constitution Parliament Association for a number of years, and we're very pleased to have him with us to talk a little bit about what this is and what the intent of today's activities are.
Thank you, Mitch.
Absolutely,
the World Constitution and Parliament Association is an organization that stems from approximately 1958, and when a number of world citizens got together and said, this world needs non-military democratic world government soon if we're going to survive very long on this planet. You know, we've got global problems which are beyond the scope of any nation state to even begin to deal with. The global destruction of the environment, global warming, the holes in the ozone layer, global militarism, global poverty and wealth.
Who were these particular people who gathered in 1958 who came to agreements about, had a consensus about this?
Some of the people here were there. Philip Isley, the Secretary General of the organization, Terence, Amer, who is president of the organization, and a number of people from around the world, and they decided that we needed a constitution. And so they sat down and contacted people all over the world, many of them legal scholars, many of them prominent citizens in one way or another, and they had 4 constituent assemblies from that time until 1991, which was the last one. During that time, they wrote this marvelous document, which is called a Constitution for the Federation of Earth.
And no doubt they have also brought it forth to such bodies as the United Nations.
Repeatedly, yes.
And what has been its reception?
During the course of the development of this organization, a secondary organization has also developed called the Global Ratification and Elections Network, which involves people from all over the world. We're talking about ultimately millions of members in 121 countries worldwide. People from all over the world have decided that citizens of the world need to start to concern themselves with the future of the world and work for this non-military democratic world government under this Constitution.
Now, does this Constitution, Glenn, negate the sovereignty of particular nations, or does it somehow elegantly embrace that while looking at a larger overstructure, so to speak?
What it does is, it depends on what you mean by the word sovereignty, of course. You know, the word in the philosophical history is very ambiguous.
Yes. And today, with what's called globalization, it makes it all the more ambiguous.
That's right. That's right. And what the...
I was sort of fishing for your definition.
Okay. Okay. What we have today, worldwide, is a collection of nations which are sovereign in title only. In reality, the powerful nations dominate, control, and even militarily invade when they want to, the less powerful nations. So sovereignty is strictly a nominal thing, which is part of the UN Charter.
Yes.
What our organization... That's right. That's right. And what the World Constitution does is guarantee the autonomy, the integrity, and the independence of every country on earth to define its own social, economic, and political system. However, they don't have sovereignty in the current sense of the word, which means there is no higher authority. Right? The World Constitution creates a non-military democratic world government over everybody, and it is the ultimate law of the world. And it has a world court system in which decisions will be enforceable by the world police and so on. So the system is kind of like the system within the United States, in which the early colonies, which were all independent entities, got together and they decided to form a federal government over all the states. And so there are certain things that are reserved for states' rights, and there are certain things that are reserved for the federal entity.
So would you say that your organization is modeling itself after that original model of the United States?
No,
states to federal government?
It's modeling it. It really doesn't have any particular model in the history of constitutions.
But it has analogies to this.
Certainly does.
I see.
It certainly does. This Constitution, I think, is a better document than the United States Constitution.
Mm-hmm.
It guarantees, for example, economic and social rights as well as political rights.
Excellent.
To all citizens of the
I
earth.
hope women and Afro-Americans are better represented in your Constitution.
Yeah, but it does have a House of Nations on the one hand, where every nation can send 1 or 2 or 3 representatives, depending on population, to the House of Nations, and that's somewhat comparable to the Senate in the United States.
Yes.
And it has the House of Peoples, comparable to the Congress.
Congress, sure.
And the House of Peoples comes from 1,000 electoral districts worldwide, depending on population, where each district elects representatives to the World Parliament.
Excellent. What is the particular intention of this gathering today here in New York City?
One of the things that we have continually done over the years is attempt to communicate with heads of government, attempt to communicate with UN ambassadors, with officials in the world who have a certain authority, who represent the current world system of nation states, and we want to communicate to them the incredible benefits of the world uniting itself. The benefits economically for everybody in the world, the benefits in terms of preserving the environment for future generations, and so on. And this is one of those functions where we have invited many UN ambassadors, and the people in New York City that are part of our organization have talked to them personally, and we want to try to communicate to them just how important this is. The last time we did a function like this was about 10 years ago. They had a meeting with UN ambassadors. I wasn't present at it, but apparently there was a lot of interest. And today, worldwide, in some countries, there is considerable interest among government officials, members of parliaments, various parliaments, some UN ambassadors in the creation of a new and just democratic world system.
Well, thank you. Pray that this be a blessed event,
well, thank you.
That you have the desired outcome.
No, thank you very much.
We are now seated with Terence Amer, who is here from Sri Lanka. He is an attorney there. He once studied at Columbia University a number of years ago, at which time he first became involved with the thinking and conceiving of the World Parliament, the World Constitution and Parliament Association. And he's been an active member ever since and is currently the co-president of this organization. So we're very pleased to have him seated with us here today. Welcome, Terence, to New York.
Yeah.
Yes. Now, if you would just tell me, what is your relationship and history with this idea? Why is it that you originally got involved in this kind of thought process?
Well, it dates back to the time of the formation of the United Nations. And at that time, just a year after the founding of the United Nations, we held a meeting at Montreux, Switzerland, where we said effectively that the World Constitution, that the United Nations cannot fulfill the obligations for which it has been founded, because it rested on the sovereignty of nations. It was only an association of nations. It was not a committee of nations. So we suggested immediately that the charter be replaced with a democratic federal world government constitution. That was 40 years ago.
Now, when you say we, who is we?
We was a collection of thinkers at the time who met in Montreux in Switzerland, and we called ourselves the World Federalists at that time, because we said that you cannot solve the ills of the world with an association of sovereign nations. You have to have it with a world federation where sovereignty is reduced and members join together to form, like in the United States Constitution, a federalist constitution.
In other words, the states subordinated
That's
to
right.
a
Correct.
federal governing body.
Otherwise, there will be anarchy. What has happened to the United Nations today, it is like a team of horses running in different directions. They are not unified. So
It's
we
not
suggested.
coherent. So
And
back
we
40
say-
years ago,
Yeah.
you had put this on the table. And how was it received?
Well, at that time, it was received very well. There were a lot of critics. There was Lord Boydo, Clement Attlee from England, Winston Churchill. They were all interested in the project. But somehow or the other, this idea of national sovereignty prevailed, and the nations would refuse to give their part of their sovereignty to a federal body. Now that has resulted in the present chaos which is facing the United Nations.
And therefore the world. And what then do you see the role you are playing now with the World Constitution Parliament Association?
Well, we are
in this respect?
trying to educate the peoples of the world to change their governments, to get the governments to agree to cede a part of their sovereignty to a federal body. And we have drafted a constitution. After a lot of thought, we means our association.
Yes.
And we have drafted what is called the Constitution for the Federation of Earth. This we did in 1977 in Innsbruck in Austria. We called for a constituent assembly. That is how constitutions are made, of all the peoples, and we had 44 countries represented on that occasion. So we adopted the Constitution for the Federation of Earth in 1977. And since that time, we have gone out on a campaign for ratifying that Constitution. That is, getting parliaments and governments to adopt the Constitution as one of their principal objectives. Now, we nearly got through one resolution in the Indian Parliament where they wanted to change the Indian Constitution to say one of the objectives of India is to see the establishment of a democratic federal world government. It came very near to passing. Hari Vishnu Kamath was the MP who moved that resolution. Unfortunately, the government fell and a change of parliaments and they had to shelve it. So since that time, we have not made much progress with parliaments moving these resolutions. But now we are again continuing the campaign, and we are going forward encouraging part of the world to move resolutions and urge their governments
But you have
to ratify.
a formidable foe, which I know you know, which is the economic powers behind the governments. The governments themselves, by and large, are puppet organizations, most, not all, but most of the time, and they are subordinate to the corporate and economic interests of the country, and actually there are no borders. So there is a certain lack of sovereignty not in the way that we would like to think about it, but because of the multinationals or transnationals, they don't recognize boundaries in the same way that even nations do. How do you begin to deal with that? Because unless you reckon with the economic powers, you're probably not going to get very far.
Well, but there is also the other side to it, that the world is careering towards economic chaos. And this is going to force the nations to come together. After all, we are living now in an interdependent world. And this interdependency opens the door to world government. There is only one or two hesitations by people. One, they seem to think that a world government will be highly bureaucratic and will lead to tyranny and oppression of people. And the other feeling
leave it to bureaucrats, they're right.
And the other feeling they have got is that their own traditions, their uniqueness will disappear in this thing. But if we study
cultural attributes, so to
if
speak.
we study our constitution, the constitution for the Federation of Earth, we see that all these have been met with, all these problems have been met with, that these are only just bogies or just fantasies. For example, we find that in the Swiss Federation, after nearly so many thousand years, you see, the traditions of each Swiss canton still remains. Nothing has happened to it, you see. United States Federation. So in the same way, a world federation will not lead to disappearance of cultures. In fact, cultures will benefit more. And also this bogey of tyranny. We have avoided that by having a Bill of Rights in our constitution. You see, an ombudsman who will see to all the defects of it. All these arguments have been met in that. And we say that the Constitution for the Federation of Earth, if adopted, will help the world to solve all its problems and lead the world to a better society.
I understand. I think that the thought behind it, the intention behind it, and much of the wisdom behind it is very beautifully conceived. It just seems that if you are waiting for economic chaos to completely reign, which it may have to before a world government is really embraced, we may still have a bit longer to wait.
Yes, but we have to act. Thought is good. Thought in action is what is needed. Thought in action,
Absolutely.
we say.
Absolutely.
And we have to work for it. Nothing came in the world, you see, without a lot of effort.
Nothing worth having has come without tremendous effort.
So we are hoping that our work will bear fruit in the very near future, because otherwise planet Earth is going to be reduced to nothing.
Humanless. Earth will continue. We just won't be here to enjoy it.
No, Earth will be burnt out like the moon. It will be another moon or another Mars or another planet, just another planet.
Terence, I want to thank you and commend you for your decades of commitment to this ideal and helping to make the world a better place in the way you've chosen.
Thank you.
Thanks for being a guest on the show. And now for the last part of this show, we are pleasantly seated here, and I'm honored to be seated with Philip Isley, who has been working for world peace for many, many years and is the Secretary General of the World Constitution and Parliament Association. Thanks so much for joining us on the show, Philip.
So I'm glad to.
Good. Was it 1958 that you began this portion of your work?
Yeah, that's when the World Constitution and Parliament Association was started.
And what is it that that inspired you to begin that way? Well, there was, of course, the existence of the United Nations,
That
which
had
many
no-
people felt
that-
was a body to offer the world that kind
It
of
wasn't.
structure.
It never was. It never was. It was a fraud to begin with, a delusion to begin with,
The delusion.
a
So,
diversion to begin with. It wasn't organized for the purpose of securing world peace. That's stated in the purpose of it, but that wasn't its purpose.
what do you feel the
The
purpose
purpose of it was
was?
to maintain the superiority of the victors in the Second World War, together with 5 people, the 5 members of the Security Council. They were going to rule the world from there on. The other members of the UN were only for show purposes.
For sure.
They have no voice. The UN was never set up to give delegates, either appointed or elected or any kind, the authority to enact world legislation to solve world problems. All they could do is talk.
You were one of the collaborators
I was a collaborator.
for a constitution that you feel does address head-on the issues that face us as a humanity politically. How is it that you intend or are strategizing to address those obstacles to the implementation of a world constitution? That was the
Well,
question.
there's-
Recognizing that those obstacles
there's
are political and economic
2
in
ways.
nature.
Well, 3 ways then, shall we say. One, of course, we invited all the governments to participate in the sessions of the World Constitutional Convention. That's a long story. They didn't send delegates. There's a reason why they didn't send delegates. That's anyway, the people's delegates through 3 sessions of a World Constituent Assembly. And the Constitution was finished at the 2nd session, was amended some at the 3rd session of the World Constituent Assembly. So it's been in finished form since 1977. We submitted it to all, it was first of all sent to all the members of the United Nations here in New York with a request that they submit it to their governments for ratification, just like we were going to repeat that today, but none of the ambassadors came. There's a reason why they didn't come. Our work has been then to mobilize the people. We've done that. We have more than 2,000 organizations in 130 countries, representing more than 120 million individual members who are lined up behind this program. And it's difficult for people directly to introduce a world government, so we still wanted to get governments involved. That's why we had this meeting, to ask the ambassadors to renew their recommendation to the national governments that they ratify the Constitution, and each of them put up money so that there would be a budget of $500 million to begin the world government.
And that money has already been earmarked for this purpose?
Oh, of course not.
Oh.
But what has been earmarked for armaments and spent is something like $100 trillion since the Second World War. In the nuclear weapons campaign and all of the armaments campaign, $100 trillion almost, probably that much. Now, what's 500 million compared to 100 trillion? Tell me. Oh, that's not very much to get a world government started. We wanted to make that appeal today. I have a budget prepared in those terms. Now, the costs of not having a world government, apart from the military costs, hot wars and cold wars and armaments, the cost has been also in the condemnation of half the population at least, or maybe 2/3 of the population of the world, to miserable living conditions which are unnecessary, because we had enough resources, technology and everything, science, so that everybody could be living a good life on this planet. But they're condemned under the first the competition of the United States and Russia, and then condemned since then to the insistence that by the United States that all the rest of the world has to be subservient to the exploitation of the world by the business and financial interests of the United States. So the people are condemned. So that 30% of the people in the third world countries and the developing countries are unemployed. Why are they unemployed? Because they have plenty of food, clothing, and shelter and all that? No, because it's not to the interest of the United States for them to be employed, because the United States is busy exploiting their resources and exploiting the people at the lowest possible wages.
Yes.
So that's the second cost of not having a world government, and that equals several $100 trillion in the deprivation of people to having a decent life. And the third cost, major cost, is the environmental cost, because the environmental problems of the world could have been well solved before now if there had been a world government to deal with those problems, environmental problems that concern the whole world. For example, air circulates all over the world. It's a common concern. It's a global common, shall we say. And all of the countries have been putting out, burning fossil fuels, coal, and nuclear, and destroying the atmosphere of the world. Now, would the people of the world, if they had a parliament, would they consent to that continuing to going on? No, that's to the interest of the powerful interests that had already been developed, who don't want to give up. Well, there's some developing countries don't want to give up selling their oil to continue polluting the air till the last drop, until the environment is completely destroyed, but that wouldn't be permitted under world government. It requires a world government to solve the problem, but only a world government to say no more burning of fossil fuels. They have to be phased out within 2 or 3, 5 years at most, and it's perfectly technically possible to go ahead. All other kinds of energy. That is a third type of cost. The destruction of the environment. It also amounts, I believe, if you'd add it up, to more than $100 trillion.
Well, I want to ask if these constitutions could be made available to people if they were interested in writing in for that.
Please, it costs
okay. We'll take care of that.
Costs $10.
We'll take care of that. I'd like to thank you very much for
thank you. It
being
wasn't
on
long
the show,
enough.
and it wasn't long enough. I tried to get you earlier, but you couldn't be had. But thank you very much.
Thank you
for
also
being here. Absolutely. Really
you can
appreciate
interview
your
me
work.
again
Thanks.
later late.
Okay.
Invite you to come out to Colorado at any time. I don't come here very often.
Excellent. Thank you very much. This is Mitchell J. Rabin for A Better World and for Radio for Peace International. Thanks so much for joining us, and we will speak to you all next week.